So let's talk about love bombing today. It's a subject that has been a little bit more popular as of late. Love bombing was definitely something I never heard of before until more recently. Let's see, I'm just gonna read quickly what Google has to say about love bombing. It is a manipulative tactic where someone showers another person with excessive attention and affection in order to gain control and influence them. So I'm really curious what you guys think about love bombing and what you've heard about it with your clients or potentially even with yourselves. And also, how do we protect ourselves from this? What advice can we give? I'll start with Holly.
Yeah, I can definitely see it as a form of manipulation. I'm guessing it's more the anxious attachment that needs to know that doesn't like the uncertainty of the beginning of a relationship and may need to exert some control over it to feel better and not have to work through those beginning stages of does this person like me? Or if they make this bold statement, they can try to lure that person in and feel safer in this uncertainty phase. And I think that it can be easy to fall for it, right? Especially in the age of ghosting. You have the opposite, which ghosting and people just not really showing up. And so when you have someone who's giving you a lot of attention, it's kind of like, oh, relief. It feels good that someone's giving me all this attention. But you really have to take a look at what stage you are in the relationship. So if it is day one and someone's asking you to take down your profile or telling you they want to spend the rest of their lives with you, and there you are on the second date and they already love you, you really have to put your goggles on to discern what's really going on here. Because I think often love bombing can lead to disappointment and hurt. So I'll start with that and I'll let Barb
Yeah.
continue.
Before Barb continues, I would like to read out some signs of love bombing so that we have some context. One is the other person seems too good to be true. They seem to share all of your interests or agree with all of your opinions. They want to be in constant contact with you. They become jealous when you want to spend time with other people. They say, I love you very early on. They want to make things official quickly, kind of like what Holly was saying, to delete all of the apps right away. They make plans to move in together. Wow. Some love bombing signs. Oh my gosh, this is so interesting. So, Barb, what do you think everybody can be victim to love bombing, or do you think certain types of people might be a little bit more susceptible? And then anything else you'd like to share on this topic?
I I don't want to use the word victim to love bombing because I think everybody has a choice in the matter. It's more a matter of whether you have familiarity with what this looks like and what it feels like. So I don't know that everybody's a victim. I think the bigger thing is just knowing what's happening. Somebody moving really fast, they get to know you really fast is a sign. So it's something for you to decide, do I want to see where it goes or do I want to tap the brakes on it and maybe call it out for what it is? So I don't want to say victim. Yes, it can be manipulation, but I don't know that everybody's consciously doing it. I think there are some people out there that are consciously trying to lure somebody in and just has a methodology to get as many dates as possible. But I think other people are doing it for different reasons. And I had already pulled up a article from Psychology Today. And so I wanted to share the 4 common motives of love bombers. I think they really resonate with me. One of them is basically coming from a family culture of affection and expressiveness. So they may see that this is how I court somebody, and I'm going to bring them flowers, I'm going to take them out to dinner, I'm going to pay for everything. So there's a little bit of that could be one of the motives. Another motive is this loneliness and desire for a close relationship to develop quickly. So there's a bit of, I don't want to be the one rejected. I want to show them how much I love them so I get this approval early on. This happens also with folks who are trying, some of that can also have a shade into trying to prove to your friends and family that you're over the last person and that you're like, look at me, I've announced I'm dating this person, look at me. So they want things to develop quickly. Another one is just a desire to keep you on hold until they decide whether or not they even want something with you. So they pull you in, they keep you on hold, and then they start making decisions, although they've already gotten your approval. And then the last one is the motive is really just that desire to manipulate, influence, or take advantage. So obviously that's a more serious motive. That's the ones that you do want to be aware of. If you are aware of the signs, like we already talked about, within the first day, they're like, when can I see you every single day? And they're texting all the time. If the person wasn't attractive to you in some way, you're like, who is this stalker? But if there's a connection and if they're playing into your love of connection or your love of being showered with gifts or your love of getting positive affirmations, then it's harder to see. And it's easier to get manipulated or influenced or taken advantage of by somebody who uses this as a manipulation tactic. I don't think the majority of people use it as a manipulation tactic. I think it's more of a self-centered thing of, I'm going to get this approval before they see who I really am. Or I don't want to be the one to reject it. So let me do all the things that I believe will get this person. Then I'm going to sit back and figure out whether I want to deal with this. I don't think those are specifically malicious, but they are basically coming from a place where the person's trying to control. They're trying to figure out and control the situation in a way that's in their favor, whether it's benevolent or malevolent. The biggest thing is just to be aware of what love bombing is and even think about whether or not it's happened to you.
Yeah, it's really interesting that article you read because it sounds like all of the different scenarios that that article gave, that none of those scenarios are like positive in any way. And so what I'm curious about, Ariel, is what is the difference between love bombing and just somebody who's expressive and is really excited about meeting you and excited about getting to know you, excited about the relationship, and is just showing it in a very natural kind of organic way. Maybe they are more excitable people, or maybe they're just more emotional people. Maybe these people are more passionate. Love bombing just sounds so manipulative. It sounds so contrived. But what about somebody that's just excited and just wants to see you more and wants to hang out, wants to talk to you, and wants to get to know you? Is it important to make that distinction? And how do you make that distinction? Any thoughts?
Yeah, excellent question. Because as everyone was speaking about this, that's one thing, Loretta, that I was thinking about personally. I've totally dated in the past men who have love bombed me, and I've totally dated men who were just that way, who were just so passionate, so intense. And that's just who they are. They're consistent about it. And so it's important for the people listening to know this is why it's important to take your time with someone. If they're coming in hot like that, it's okay. It doesn't mean right off the bat that something is wrong with them. Look at their astrology chart to know, okay? Because I've dated a lot of Scorpios and wow. So it's not always something that's a bad thing. And I love the intensity. I personally love the intensity of love. I love it when men are like, pull out the guitar and sing to me and go on the dates that turn into 6 hours and we're going from place to place. I've experienced a lot of intensity and love in my life, and I love the intensity. So I think that's what it is. Is that person consistent? Are they still showing you that level of affection 3 months in, 4 months in? That's what I would say. And that's why it's important for women to protect themselves, especially women, because that is speaking to one of our love languages oftentimes. And especially if the woman's coming from a background of being love starved or attention starved or having someone not really see her or commit to her, which is a lot of women. And when someone comes in speaking that language, it's very easy for the woman to start bonding immediately. And so for women, it's important that we keep our wits about us and we take in what we're feeling, but we also give it time to see, is this who he is? Is he consistent with this over time?
Yes.
And When the connection starts getting more serious and you start having the deeper conversations and talking about commitment and things start getting real, you will know pretty quickly then whether or not that guy is just an intense, passionate guy, or whether or not he came in and pulled this manipulation tactic on you, because you'll see him starting to pull back once you start putting up some things like, what are we doing here? What's the title? Let's meet some of our friends, mesh our friend groups, or let's meet the parents, things like that. Things are starting to get real. Most of the manipulators will start pulling way back then. You'll see a shift in that dynamic. Whereas if someone's just passionate and intense, they're going to be right there with you with that, right? And so you're not going to see any pullback. And if they're uncomfortable with something, they're way more likely to just have a conversation with you about it, but keep the level of communication consistent. So that's what I've noticed in my personal life and professionally coaching women for the past decade. Consistency is key. And that's why you need to take the time, right?
Yeah, that's really good advice because we're playing the long game here. Yeah, you can come in hot in the beginning, but this is also a marathon. Is that
Exactly.
going to be that way down the line as well? Yeah, definitely. It's really important making plans to move in together, saying I love you early on, making it official, telling you to get off the apps. They're entitled to ask. They are. Like, they're entitled to express what it is they need, but we are also entitled to say no. We are also entitled to say, look, I'm not really comfortable with that. I'm not really ready for that. I just want to continue to see what's out there just to make sure you and I are a really good fit for each other. I'm not ready to move in together yet, or I don't want to put that I'm exclusive in a relationship. It's okay to have our boundaries, right? So I think what's really important here, especially like for our clients, for ourselves, what's really important is just for us to know ourselves, be in connection with ourselves and know what we're comfortable with, what pace we're comfortable going. It's totally okay for them to ask. They can ask to see us a million times if they want to. But if we need time to ourselves, if we want time, our own time to spend with our friends, with our families, like just by ourselves, like it's up to us to say that. It's up to us to set that boundary and express our own needs, right? What do you think about this, Holly?
Absolutely. I think really being in tune with your own feelings is important because then you will be more observant if it is manipulation and control. Like if they're telling you what to do or highly suggesting something, I feel like that's where it gets into the manipulation and control versus they're just really into you and you could be on the same page. So it's making sure it's coming from your heart and what you're feeling and not because you want them to accept you and feeling like you have to go with what their agenda is. So
Yeah. And going back to what Ariel was saying, and actually in the article that Barb read about courtship, and it's just interesting that that article spun courtship as like a negative thing, whereas I personally love courtship. I love it. But just because they bring me flowers or whatever, I'm not sitting there thinking on a few dates, oh my God, this is the guy I'm going to marry. This is my forever person. I think it's just really important to be really present. So that distinction between okay, wow, this person just did something really nice for me. It was so sweet and that made me feel so good and so happy versus going down the road of, yeah, then we're going to get married. He's so great and it's just going to be perfect. And being able to balance like reality versus that fantasy, right? A lot of that fantasy mindset. So I guess in your experience, Barb, with clients who have had experience with love bombing before, what are some of their frustrations? What do they complain about? What are they venting to you about? What is it that is so hard for them in this situation?
So let me address what you talked about, the courtship thing, and also combine that with what you're asking.
Yeah.
A lot of times, especially women who lean towards the masculine energy, this idea of courtship is such a relief. I have so many clients who are like these independent, don't need a man kind of vibe. And they're so used to doing things on their own. They're so used to paying for dinners, they're used to paying for all their kids' stuff. And so a person comes along that truly does come from a family culture of affection and expressiveness and courtship. I think those motives are actually authentic. And so a woman, like some of my clients and even myself, you're like, wow, this is really nice to actually just relax into being showered with attention or flowers or whatever. Wow, this is kind of nice. And what happens is you get sucked into that piece of it, and very subtly you start to adapt and adjust because you want this not to stop. You want this type of affection to continue, right? Like, wow, this is really nice. I'm going to keep taking this. And so what happens is that you start to accept these things, and the boundaries aren't as hard because you're like, oh, I'm just going to go into the flow with this. Let's see what happens. And if they're truly somebody who's more of like the love bombers and not the people that just have this type of energy where they're just always going to be expressiveness from day 1 to year 6, then it starts to shift. And so it's almost like a pursuer-distancer relationship at that point. They come forward, you go to them. They step back, you go towards them. And so there ends up being a push-pull that leaves the person who was bombed confused, right? So wait a minute, like they came in, they showered me with gifts and courtship, and now they're pulling away. What's going on? But at this point, they're sucked in. They want to feel that. And so it goes pursuer, distancer, pursuer, distancer. And if you've been in relationships like that before, then you have a tendency to fall into them again. So there's frustration, there's disappointment, and there's confusion that happens. And so to your point again, once you feel that, call it out. There is no rule that says you have to wait for the person to reach out and tell you something. There's no rule that says there's X number of days before you reach out and ask a question. If you start to sense inconsistency with your partner, especially when it's new, you call it out. You're like, hey, I haven't heard from you a little bit. Everything okay? And it's a very simple, clear message, which does 2 things. 1, it asks the question. 2, it starts to exhibit the kind of boundaries that you should be having with this person regardless, versus allowing it, oh, no, if I wait a little bit longer, he'll call and then he'll take me out to dinner again. It'll be great. I think this whole idea of the person in waiting or the lady in waiting is an old story that we shouldn't be adhering to anymore. With my clients and in my own experiences, the sooner we call these things out that we see as being inconsistent or not communicating properly, the clearer picture we have of what's actually going on. Either that person's going to come back, you know what? You're totally right. Let's make a plan that it's normal for us to communicate a couple times a week. And if I don't do it, call me out on it. I totally get it. Versus you do something and that person doesn't change their behavior. If you call something out, they don't change their behavior, then that should give you information on whether to stay in that relationship, continue to cultivate it, or step away. For many people, it's very hard to step away because you're still hoping that something will change or you'll get another set of flowers or something. And so you've taken the bait of what these love bombers are putting out, but then there's nothing left. They've moved on to something else. And it's not even necessarily moved on to another person. It's just that they have made a decision in their own heads that I don't have the time to put into this, or I can't make this a priority right now. They keep you in this place. Again, intentional or unintentional, it's what happens if you don't set good boundaries and have good communication once you start seeing some of these things happen.
Yeah. Definitely communication is really important. And if something's not working in any stage of dating, it's really important to share that and really important to express ourselves. As I was hearing you talk, Barb, I heard a couple of things. It sounds like what you're saying is, so someone comes in and is like showering somebody with all of this like affection and all of this stuff, and you're saying they hook them in a way,
A little bit.
and they now expect that to continue, even though there hasn't been any conversation about exclusivity or commitment. I feel like in the beginning stages of a relationship or of dating, we're just getting to know each other, right? Nobody really says that we're only supposed to date each other until there's a conversation about it. So is it that we just get these expectations in our head? Like, whether or not they mean to hook, like what would be the purpose of someone like hooking somebody, keeping them on the hook and then disappearing? What are they getting out of it by keeping that person on the hook? Maybe they just change their mind, or maybe they just are dating around. What obligations are there for two people in the beginning of dating?
In the beginning, I think it's all about approval and validating each other. It can get to a place where it feels good, but then if something shifts or if there's some conflict, if you're not able to resolve even a simple conflict, it starts to show who the person is, right? They'll either step back or step forward. And some people can't do that. Some people keep stepping back, and other people, they can have accountability and own whatever part that they did. If someone starts to be, if they're consistent and they show up every time versus they start to get flaky, but then they don't have then they don't own that piece of it, then the person who's on the receiving end allows it. Ariel said this before, people will only treat you the way you allow them to treat you. And so that's why when you're in the seat of being bombed, if you allow them to treat you because you're still hoping for that promise of getting courted again, then that's what's going to continue. And it can feel really subtle. It's like, wait, everything was great at first, but then it shifted. And whereas the one person's already starting to pull out, the other person's like, no, 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 wait, I'm still here. And so you get into that dynamic, which is why it does feel like you got hooked. And so you're holding out, waiting to see if that happens. And I've seen this happen with a lot of my clients, right? So the clients get into a situation, they think everything is great, and even have certain clients who just boundaries just thrown out the door completely because they just wanted the crumbs of whatever that person had. Even after that person said, hey, I don't really want to see you exclusively, I'm dating around, they're like, it's okay, we can still have sex. You're like, no, that's not going to work. With one of my clients, you can even hear in her tone of voice her excitement about this one person. But then when it came to the reality of what that relationship really was, like her voice got down more to more of a whisper because she's like, oh yeah, embarrassingly, he doesn't want a relationship, but I'm still hooking up with him. So, we don't want to get into those patterns. And it's a tough one. One of the things that Psychology Today even said is some people have just been really lonely for a long time, and so they do this just to get that approval, right? So I'm gonna work really hard to get this approval, even though I'm really not into the relationship. And so there's that piece of it, which can be really hard for the person on the receiving end who just feels like they're actually just getting compliments and things are good. Unfortunately, there's a lot of either intentional or unintentional deception happening with love bombing.
Yeah, this actually sounds a lot also like anxious and attachment, or anxious attachment and avoidant.
Absolutely.
I can hear that a little bit too. Ariel, I'm just curious, hearing all of this, do you have any observations from this conversation so far?
Yeah, sure. I think that if we're going to speak to the attachment style, we can see all attachment styles represented in this. Depending on the situation, you can see very clearly how a disorganized attachment style could come in really hot and heavy and then end up pulling back due to all kinds of things, fear being a main driver, avoidance as well. And then you can see anxious as well. So I think you can see a lot of that. And you could have a secure attachment style person come in who's just intense and consistent about being intense. So I think it's just a matter of that. But also understanding that oftentimes when we have conversations like this, people are asking and wondering, which is it? Is it that we're both responsible for one another, how we're showing up, how that's affecting the other person? Or do we have no responsibility? Because we have people speaking to this from both camps. There's one camp that's like, that person doesn't owe you anything. If you're getting attached, it's your problem. We have another camp that's, if you're going to engage in dating, you have to understand that you're dealing with a human being with their own neurochemistry, their own baggage, their own expectations. And we all have to be responsible to one another if you're going to date with intention. So there, you have to decide what camp you fall into and how you want to approach dating. It's important that everyone who's experiencing dating be responsible for themselves. Absolutely. There's another element to this with brain chemistry, that someone coming in hot and heavy and then pulling back is the type of experience that your neurochemistry can get addicted to, an actual addiction. And so we also have to address that there are chemicals being released when someone's coming in hot and heavy like that, triggering your releasing of oxytocin, dopamine. Your neurochemistry will start bonding with that person. If you are a healthy individual mentally, that's just going to be a natural for you to start releasing those pair bonding chemicals and for you to start bonding. And so, with that being said, you do have to, for the person who's receiving the love bombing, again, which is why we have to slow things down. That's how we take responsibility for what we're experiencing, to be able to take the time to really assess what type of individual we're dealing with. And along the way, it's okay for you to take that love in. But if that person pulls back, you need a game plan for how you deal with the rejection or deal with someone who's not consistent with you, because that is likely to happen in the course of anyone's dating life. You're likely to experience these things. So responsibility, I would hope everyone would be entering into dating with the right type of mentality, and not only be responsible to themselves, but understand you are dealing with another human being, and that matters. So there are a lot of things going on there. But also, Loretta, to address what you were saying before, we also have to take in consideration culturally that with the courting, right? Like we spoke about before, there are some cultures who come in with this type of intensity because that's how they're trained to court. That's how they're trained to date, period. You'll also get a lot of these things from older men, from the older generations. Like when you mentioned about okay, let's get off the app and let's focus, because older generations know, because of the way that they dated, and then coming into this app dating, that it's just a revolving door and that it is very distracting to be on apps. And they've been burned so many times and had women and men just playing around and things, that there is a healthy intention behind, let's get off the app right now so we can focus and see where this goes, and then we can decide whether or not we want to get back on the app. So all of that needs to be taken into consideration. And what that takes is a conversation. It takes openness to discuss these things. Like, oh, okay, you're asking me to get off the app. Okay, why is that? What are you thinking? Why would you ask me to do that? I'm not saying no, I'm not saying yes. I just want to know where you're coming from on this. And so have some conversations about it. If he's a villain, he's going to do this, because we all know that's not necessarily true. And you could be leaving someone who's really good, serious, mature minded on the table if you're going to improperly categorize people. So at the end of the day, what this takes is a discussion, right? You want to be curious, you want to ask questions, you also want to be open about how they're approaching you is affecting you. So if we can have those conversations, that will add to the vetting, and that will keep people where they need to be for the most part. What happens normally is that we don't talk about it. These things are just happening, people are feeling things, then someone ends up pulling back and the other person ends up feeling devastated or rejected. Usually no questions are being asked and no conversations are being had along the way.
Yeah, that's a great point, is to just have conversations that are more curious. Why do you want this? Instead of labeling it right away as love bombing. Which brings me to another point. I'm actually concerned because I think when it comes to love bombing, doesn't really come into my mind. I know it exists and everything, but when I was dating before, I've definitely been love bombed, but it just isn't something that I was ever afraid of, that I was like, oh, I'm going to get manipulated or taken advantage of. That just wasn't really my view on dating when I was dating before I got married. My concern is that men don't know what to do now because they don't want to love bomb somebody. But it's like, then they don't know, can I show up and I really feel strongly for this person? Can I be expressive? Can I buy this person gifts? Can I shower this person with flowers? Are they going to think I'm love bombing them? And it's like, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because I feel like in dating, we've lost a little bit of that. Before a man shows up with flowers and the woman gushes, now a man shows up with flowers and the woman thinks yellow flags. My dad showered my mother with gifts and they were in a beautiful relationship for a very long time. And we saw that as kids. Of course, we aspired to have that, but social norms have changed. I think the best thing is do what feels authentic to you and be who you are. I've had one man personally say, I'm a giver. I love giving. I give of myself. I give in service, and I just love to give. And but he stated that about himself from the get-go and proceeded to show me in his words and his actions that that's truly what he was. If that's not what you really love, like my ex, he didn't really like giving flowers and he told me that, but he would do other things in service that was his language. So I think if your love language is this idea of gifting, which is one of the love languages, just be upfront about it. Hey, you know what? Here's the way I express love. I love giving gifts. I hope you appreciate, but this is how I express my love. The difference is when somebody does something and then there's a motive behind it. If I give her love and flowers and chocolates and candy, she will accept me. That's a whole different approach, right? It can't be this transactional thing. If you are a giver, you give without condition. And you also give without the validation. If they're like, oh, thanks, that was an expression of my love. It hurts me that you didn't give a crap about it. Who are you in this situation? And if this person isn't appreciative of your love language, maybe that's not the right person for you. But I think if this is a direction to men, if men can be authentic about what they want to do in courtship, then that should be okay in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. My concern is just that it's hard for us sometimes to receive love, to receive joy and really revel in that and feel that and just be grateful and appreciative. My concern is with this whole love bombing thing. Because to be honest, people just change their minds in dating. Like sometimes you're dating and ideally people would have a conversation versus just ghosting. But in the beginning stages, we're trying to see if we're a match, but we don't know. My concern is that when we are showered with things or someone does something nice for us, we're now like, oh my God, this person's love bombing me potentially, like not being able to accept it. What do you think about that, Holly?
Oh my gosh, this is so funny. I'm trying to think back to some of my experiences because I'll give an example. I remember this one first date where he showed up. We went to a fancy restaurant, which I would never recommend for a first date, dressed up, and they came out with 2 dozen roses, bottle of champagne, always all the 9 yards. So when I'm processing through this, I'm thinking, this is a pretty grand gesture for a first date. This isn't about me and knowing me. This is about the idea of me and what you potentially see, right? So I think it is important to evaluate every situation differently. Now, first date with my fiance was an 8-hour date. We were both on the same page. There wasn't any extravagance, but we did spend a lot of time together and we both walked away with very strong feelings early on. So I think it really is trying to understand what the intention is on the other end, right? Because a lot of times it's to be liked or accepted or to nail something down quickly in a relationship. but it could be the other two, right? I think with the love bombing piece, I do see where there is control and manipulation because people are just really looking to control what you're doing. If they say to you, this is what I want. And there's this strong feeling towards, I want you to do the same. And they're putting you on that same page as them. It's like you're no longer checking in with your feelings and seeing what pace do I want to go at. It's being decided for you in a sense when that language is strong. I've certainly been on that end of things too. First date, let's take our profiles down immediately. Second date, I love you. I know in every situation I've had and all of those, it didn't feel right. So when it doesn't feel right, just trust your gut.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. It's very different telling somebody, I'm gonna take down my dating profiles and I would like you to do the same versus, hey, so I'm gonna do this. Feel free to do whatever you want. I just want to tell you where there's no agenda in the second. At least that sounds like we have more freedom and autonomy and they're being respectful of us. And I just remember growing up, my aunt used to live with us. And when my uncle was courting my aunt, when I was just a tiny little thing, but I would see this, like he would come to the door and he would hide flowers behind his back and she'll come to the door and he'll surprise her with it. That has stuck with me and will stick with me for those memories. And I love that. Men are givers. Their masculine energy is a giving energy. Feminine energy is more receiving. Masculine energy likes to feel appreciated and needed. And so it's natural. But yes, we definitely have to make a distinction between someone who's giving from a place of it's natural and organic and because they feel it and want to share it versus a control or manipulation tactic. And so what tips, Ariel, do you think we can give our clients for how to make this distinction?
Okay, yeah. I think it's important because we have spoken a lot about the positives and misconceptions and things like that of the love bombing, but also keeping in mind that the term love bombing is coming from a very specific place and experience, and that it was a coined term due to the personality types like narcissist and people like that utilizing it as a tool of manipulation and control in order to lure a partner into an abusive relationship. We don't want to take love bombing and throw it completely on its head and say that it's something that it's not too, because it definitely is that a term that's being spoken about now for a good reason. And it's because it is being used as a manipulation tool and tactic, and it is leading a lot of people into abusive, really horrible situations and relationships. With that being said, speaking to people who are dating, it is very important for them to, like I said before, to take your time. It's also very important for you to engage your intuition. Okay, like what Holly said, like what Barb has said as well. It's very important if you're feeling like something is off, if you're feeling like, okay, this is really intense and this seems too good to be true, it might be. And you need to be aware of that. And I think that journaling, keeping a dating journal, is very important because it's easy to get swept up into all the emotions and all the commotion going on and all the distractions. And so after your date, it's very good to just take 5 minutes and just write down, this is what I experienced, this is how I felt. And so you have something in black and white that you can go back to, and you can reflect when something else down the road happens that might make you feel a little weird. So take your time with that. I'd say journal. I'd say make sure that you're paying attention to your intuition. Make sure that you're as present as you can possibly be in those moments as well, because your body is telling you a lot about what's going on that your brain's not necessarily picking up on. Okay.
Yeah,
So your
absolutely.
body's going to be feeling things. If you feel tense, if you're feeling anxiety held in your body, if you're feeling weirdness going on in your body when you're around that person and throughout this process, and their intensity is making your body feel bad or have negative reactions, you definitely do not want to ignore that.
Yeah, and perhaps even having someone that you trust to talk to about, is this normal? Do people just buy 2 dozen roses and on a first date,
Yeah.
like
So
to a
I would
really like a coach maybe, or maybe a friend that's really reasonable, like maybe
Okay, yeah, because I was going to say, and the reason why I took pause there, Loretta, is because oftentimes in female friendship groups, people will have, yeah, they'll have a friend that just validates everything, and that's not really helpful. But then they'll also have kind of the frenemy, a girl who's like secretly jealous of that kind of thing too. So you have to be, when especially speaking to my women clients and they're talking about their friend group and the information they're divulging and advice that they're getting, I tell people to proceed with caution with that. I think you're right on, Loretta, that speaking to someone else is a good idea, but speak to your therapist, speak to a coach. If you can, if you have the resources for that, go there because there's so many dynamics in a female friendship group that can end up hurting your dating life. So be careful with that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That is
absolutely.
so true. I always tell my clients that when you ask for someone's advice, it's filtered through all of their experiences and their perspective.
That's right.
And it
Mhm.
has nothing to do with your life and your experiences.
That's right. Absolutely. Yep.
Take it
Yeah.
with a grain of salt.
That's right. Yep. Always stay true to yourself. So it's always checking. It's good to bounce things
Trust
off of other
thyself.
people. Yeah. Trust thyself. That's right. That's right.